Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Monday, November 11th slate of college basketball DFS on DraftKings. We've got a nice little 11-game slate where DraftKings is still kind of being slow to update with their box scores, with their game logs, with their pricings of some of these guys. So there's a lot of situations where if you have done your research, you can identify some really good plays. And guess what? I have done my research and I think that I've been able to identify some really good plays on this slate. And so we're here to break down all 11 of these games for you, tell you who these best plays actually are, tell you how to construct your lineups for this slate, and hopefully help you make some money here on this Monday night college basketball DFS slate. Now, with the calendar being what it is right now, we're in November. College football is going on as well. I'm doing both college basketball and college football content here. So make sure you're subscribed so you can be here for all of it. I'm not promising a college basketball episode every day, although I do plan on having a college basketball episode for the Tuesday night slate because that is a big one because we got the Champions Classic going on. So if you're subscribed to the channel, you will know when all those episodes drop, whenever they drop for college basketball and college football. I'm also currently coaching 2 varsity sports at the high school that I teach and work at. So I'm not necessarily going to have an episode for every single day, every single slate, but if you're subscribed, you'll know when they drop. You can be here for those. All right, without further ado, though, we got 11 games to break down, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first game we're going to break down is actually the game with the highest total on the slate. That is McNeese State heading over to take on Alabama. This one is interesting because McNeese State, kind of like one of those like mid-major darling teams that people liked, coached by Will Wade. They played a pretty fast tempo. They score a decent amount of points. Alabama, we know, plays at a fast tempo, scores a ton of points. KenPom has this game projected to be 92-72 in favor of Alabama, with that total of 164 points being the highest on the slate. McNeese currently this season ranks 172nd in the nation in tempo, and Alabama ranks 2nd in the nation in tempo. On the McNeese side, they had a slight change in their starting lineup. They played game 1 in Sioux Falls against South Dakota State. That was a pretty good basketball game. It was on the Field of 68 YouTube channel. I remember watching it when I was at school one day. They started in that game Javon Garcia, Brandon Murray, Allen Breed, Christian Shoemate, and Joe Charles. So what happened in game 2, though, Allen Breed did not play. It was against a non-Division I opponent. They blew him out. Their name was Biblical Studies. They were not any good. And Omar Cooper started at guard that game when Allen Breed was out. So Cooper did not play in the first game either. So just a little bit of interesting there with Allen Breed and Omar Cooper. Allen Breed not marked out on DraftKings. I personally think Breed will play in this game. Like, they had no reason to kind of use him in that game against Biblical Studies if he was nursing an injury. So anyway, what you end up with also is you end up with guys like Copeland, Parker, Richards, and Silabang will come off the bench and play minutes. The top 3 on this team in usage in order are Christian Shoemate, Allen Breed, and Brandon Murray. Shoemate was McNeese's probably 2nd best player last season after Shahada Wells. He's pretty good. The problem he's going to have in this game, though, is that he does play the 4 in Alabama. They can get to some pretty big lineups, so he's definitely going to be outsized. But, hey, if he's going to lead the team in usage on the game with the highest total on the slate, only $7,000. I don't mind the play. Allen Breed, I really do like. He was, if you watch the game against South Dakota State, he was the guy that had the ball in his hands down the stretch, when they were trying to win that game. He's a transfer from Providence. He's not bad. $3,800, I think, is a great price to pay for him. I'm really intrigued to play him in some of my lineups tomorrow night. And then Brandon Murray, also kind of more of an off-ball guard, but he is a guy that is super cheap, $3,800 on DraftKings, 3rd in usage on this team. $3,800, definitely a price I'm willing to pay for that. Joe Charles is priced all the way up to $8,300. He is their center. He does not play huge minute load. He also really he's kind of undersized for the guys he's going to be going up against with Alabama. I think $8,300 is a little bit steep for him. His usage rate is not that high either. On the Alabama side, McNeese is a really bad rebounding team. It stood out in the game against South Dakota State. Oscar Clough had a double-double in that game for South Dakota State. I think that plays into Alabama's hands because they've got a lot of guys that are going to get boards. Alabama is also a team that is going to play like 10, 11 guys. So far this season, they have started Mark Sears, LeBron Philon. I hope his name's pronounced LeBron. LeBaron, I don't know how you say it. I haven't watched a game with them with sound on yet. LeBaron Philon, Darion Reed, Jaron Stevenson, and Big Cliff Omoruyi. They also have off the bench played the Latrell Wrightsell, Grant Nelson, Cheryl, and Holloway have all played minutes off the bench. So basically, this is a deep team. they're going to play a lot of guys. Mark Sears is their best player. He is going to probably lead them in usage, probably going to lead them in shots. Here's the problem, though. He's probably not going to play a full minute total. He's probably not going to play 30-plus minutes in this game. Your hope of playing Mark Sears would be that McNeese keeps this close and that he's going to stay out there longer than expected. So to me, he's kind of like a game stack play only. I'm only going to be playing Mark Sears if I'm playing McNeese guys on the other side because I'm hoping that they keep it close. Big Cliff, I do really like. As we mentioned that McNeese is a poor rebounding team. Big Cliff is a guy that doesn't need to play a whole lot of minutes to put up a big total. He's had pretty much 2 DFS viable games so far, and he hasn't played over 20 minutes in either game. So I'm definitely in on Big Cliff at $7,200. If McNeese does keep it close and he does play 25 to 30 minutes, he's going to absolutely smash. Grant Nelson intrigues me. He came off the bench the first 2 games. He's their returning starting power forward. He tends to really shine in games against weak competition. It's just what he's always done. And so I really do have some interest in Grant Nelson, but I just don't know how many minutes he's going to play. I don't know if he's going to continue coming off the bench, but this is a spot I would typically like to target him in. And then LeBron or however you say it, LeBaron Feinlein, he's just a stat sheet stuffer. He's going to get points, rebounds, and assists. Doesn't need a whole lot of minutes to rack it up. Definitely a guy who's going to make my player pool. And then Aiden Holloway, I've said time and time again, I just can't quit him. Ever since the Auburn versus Baylor game at the start of last season where he put up 19, 3, and 6, I can't get rid of him. I think he's a quality player. He does some really good things. $4,500. If he ends up playing 20-plus minutes, he plays with a high usage rate when he's out there. I think he's kind of a GPP type of play at $4,500. I think there's better points per dollar plays out there, like the 2 from McNeese State that I mentioned. But if you're looking for somebody that nobody's going to play who does have incredible upside, Aiden Holloway would be that guy. Game number 2. We've got Winthrop heading to Plattsburgh to take on Virginia Tech. Ken Pom has this game as being 80-72 in favor of Virginia Tech with a total of 152 points. For Winthrop, they returned their 3 best players from last season. That is Kelton Talford, KJ Doucet, and Kaysen Harrison. They're by far their 3 best players. The other 2 starters are Baker and Camerad. Camerad is $4,000 even. Baker's $3,700, so they are cheap starters, but they're not going to play with high usage rates. They're not going to play huge minute totals. I'm just not super interested in those 2 guys. And really, even the top 3 guys, Talford, Doucet, and Harrison, it's hard to play them because they're priced up, because they're returning players, and because they're players that played with high usage rates, played with high effectiveness last season. They're just priced up a little out of what I would be willing to pay for them. And they're probably just going to be a pass for me. And this Winthrop team might be a total cross-off for me. On the Virginia Tech side, they are back to doing the Mike Young thing where they're going to run their offense through their 2 bigs. And right now, those are Toby Lawal and Malajel Poteet, a guy that I actually coached against when he was in high school back in 2019, 2020, before COVID happened. Wow, he's been in college for a while. Anyway, the other 3 starters are Shutt, Rex Steiner, and Jaden Young. For Lawal, he was not this elite scorer, great offensive player at VCU, but he's been really good at Virginia Tech, as has this season Malajel Poteet. Because of their size advantage down low against Winthrop, I think that both of them are absolutely in play here on this one. They're probably going to be the 2 guys that lead the team in usage. Poteet being $1,600 cheaper, I would probably be more likely to play him over Toby Lawal because, again, Lawal was not that profile of player when he was at Virginia Tech. Now, from the guard spot, Jaden Young has actually totaled the best usage of the 3. He's a guy that is going to get a lot of shots. He's a guy that is going to get a lot of run. But Rex Steiner, I do not know his first name. Hold on, let me get that. Brandon Rex Steiner has actually been the more efficient, and he's actually had better peripherals than Jaden Young. So the fact that he's $5,500 and more expensive than Jaden Young does make sense to me. But I do think if I were to play a guard for this Virginia Tech side, it would be either Rex Steiner or Young. Game number 3, we've got St. Peter's heading to the rack to take on Rutgers. Ken Pom has that game as being Rutgers 74-58 with a game total of 132 points. This is the lowest game total on the slate. This is not a great game environment target. I really think you could totally cross off this game and be none the wiser, but there are some interesting value plays that are available. If you're wondering why the game total is so low, well, St. Peter's ranks outside the top 300 in tempo. Rutgers ranks 12th in the nation in defensive efficiency. When you combine slow pace and good defense, you end up with low point totals. All right, so on the St. Peter's side, their starters are Eaton, Randolph, Ziegler, Sow, and Roberts. Marcus Randolph is probably my favorite play of the group. He's only $4,500. He plays nearly every minute if he's not in foul trouble. He is a returner for the St. Peter's team. He started on the team that made the NCAA tournament last season. As long as he can stay out of foul trouble, he's going to be their guy. He does lead the team in usage rates so far this season. Armani Ziegler plays a ton of minutes also, and he's actually he puts up a lot of peripheral stats, has a 21% usage rate on the season. That's a lot for a guy who's $4,000. Again, this is a returning starter on the tournament team last season. But he's been super inefficient from the field. He's only been 5 for 20. So the thing is, I don't expect that to kind of progress any against this Rutgers defense. But he does play a lot of minutes. He does put up a lot of peripheral stats. Only $4,000. He does have me a little bit intrigued for that reason. But like I said, my favorite guy on this St. Peter's side is definitely Marcus Randolph at $4,500. On the Rutgers side, we got to start off by talking about the freshman Dylan Harper. He is their best player. He is one of the 5 starters. He had an insane 35% usage rate in game 1, which is just crazy. If he continues with that and Rutgers continues to kind of win games, he's going to put up stats. In that game, he had 20 points, 3 boards, 4 assists, and 3 steals. When you account for the turnovers, also, he had about 32 fantasy points, which is about what we want here in college basketball DFS. You definitely want 4 times value for their salary. If you want to win a GPP, you're probably going to need 5 times, maybe even closer to 6 times because of some of the value that's on this slate. But he can definitely get you 4 times value at that salary, $8,100. Now, the remaining starters are Jeremiah Williams, Jordan Durkak, Zach Martini, and, I'm going to butcher this name, Emmanuel Ogbole. Yeah, those are the other 4 starters. The bench players, PJ Hayes, Jamichael Davis, and Lathan Somerville will all play off of the bench. Somerville, of all the bench players, intrigues me. He plays with a super high usage rate. He's really talented. Freshman in this recruiting class for Rutgers. He played more minutes than Ogbole at the center position, but I would have much more interest in him if he was $4,000, even as opposed to $5,500. That sets the goal for a guy coming off the bench a little high. Jordan Durkak was a great player at Merrimack last season. I believe he was the Northeast Conference Player of the Year. I think Merrimack's the Northeast Conference. Don't quote me on that. But he was definitely one of the best players in that conference. He was a guy that on some of these mid-major slates that you get on DraftKings, we played all the time because he had a super high usage rate, just a really quality player. But he only took 5 shots in 21 minutes played in game 1, and neither of those are going to cut it. $7,100 salary, we really need him to be an alpha in the offense if we want to pay up to get him. And he's just not worth it at this point with his current role with this Louisville offense. So my main interest on the Louisville side is probably going to be with Dylan Harper. And then if you're looking for a cheap starter, Zach Martini at $4,500, even though the usage rate isn't great, he plays a decent amount of minutes. $4,500, not a bad price tag. Game number 4, we've got Grambling heading to Florida to take on the Gators. And Florida's got some extra stuff going on. There's a little bit of drama going on with their coach, Todd Golden, right now, but apparently he's going to continue coaching the team. This game is currently projected to be 86-65 in favor of the Florida Gators with a game total of 151 points. Now, the interesting thing about Grambling is they actually just played Ole Miss to a 2-point game last week. So if they play their best ball, this game could absolutely be close, honestly. Like it could be. And so what we saw in that game also is what they're going to do with their usage, with their minutes, if they do keep a game close. So they saw heavy minutes from 4 of the starters in that game. Dozier, Stevenson, Burnett, and Ross, they're their 4 highest priced players. Those were all 4 of the guys that played super heavy minutes in that game. Mikhail Stevenson did lead them in usage in that game with a 38% usage rate, which is crazy. But hey, this is a guy that he can definitely fill it up. Last year he did play for Grambling. Was not their like offensive alpha last season, but definitely did have a high usage rate. And then Dozier also was second on the team with 26% usage. The downside for Dozier is that he's quite expensive though. But last year we did see a little more out of him than what we saw out of Stevenson. I don't think either of them are bad plays. I think Stevenson's a little more palatable because of the price tag. The other one that's interesting is Antoine Burnett at 6,200. He's currently averaging 12 points, 8.5 boards, and 2 assists. That's not bad. But really, I would like for him to be a little cheaper. If these Grambling guys were cheaper, I think that they would be in a great spot. But they're a little too expensive. I think there's better points per dollar plays out there. On the Florida side, they've got Walter Clayton Jr. He is their best player. He's transferred from Iona 2 years ago. He's absolutely their best player, in my opinion, after watching this team in night 1. He's currently averaging 19 points, 3 assists, or 3 boards and 5 assists. And that's pretty good, especially considering that like neither game was close. And so, if he's going to put up a lot of stats in blowout games, if he's going to play well in blowout games, and that bodes well for this one because it means any type of game environment, he's going to play a decent amount of minute load, going to take a decent amount of shots, going to score a decent amount of fantasy points. In fact, when you look at their 2 blowout games so far, Walter Clayton, Will Richard, and Elijah Martin have all played over 30 minutes in both those games. So, they might be a little pricey, but all 3 of those guys, Clayton, Martin, and Richard, feel like safe plays because even if the game gets out of hand, they're still going to be out there on the floor, which is what we like because you can't score DraftKings points if you're not on the floor. Speaking of Elijah Martin, he is an FAU transfer. He was the Robin to John L. Davis's Batman for the last 2 seasons at FAU. He's a quality player. He puts up a lot of peripheral stats. He's a great rebounding guard. He hasn't really seen the most shots for Florida so far this season, and it makes it really hard for him to hit value at a salary of $8,500 when he's not one of the top shot getters. The top shot getter so far this season has been Will Richard. And like I said, he's played over 30 minutes in both games, so the opportunity is going to be there. The only problem is that he doesn't do a whole lot with the peripherals. So really, you're playing a scorer where you're pretty much going to need him to score 20, 25 points in order to hit value. I do like Alex Condon. In the last game, he did have 23 points, but only 1 rebound. I do think he is going to be absolutely oversized for this Grambling front line. He absolutely can give them issues, but we need him to actually get rebounds. We need him to play a lot of minutes, and that's something that hasn't necessarily happened the first 2 games, but I do like the upside of playing him at $7,600. All right, that's going to do it for the first 4 games. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we're going to continue on with the rest of the show. Now, before we continue on, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I try to tweet out all updates for the show that I think are relevant. And then also, I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you reach out to me on Twitter. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube, as well as on the audio feed. If you're looking for a community to be a part of that is entirely free, that's talking DFS all the time, the Fantasy Corner Discord is the place for you. And the college basketball channel in there has been jumping lately. So we've got a lot of really smart, really good people that are going to be in there pretty much all day long, talking strategy, talking plays, just getting ideas out there. And, every now and then there's guys that I miss that some of these guys put me on that really helps out. And if you're just looking for people to talk DFS with, I cannot recommend it enough. Also, I do write an article on my Patreon for every single college basketball DFS slate, where I profile my core plays as well as why they are my core plays. Now, I can't guarantee that you can just plug those into a roster and just, win thousands of dollars, but I can guarantee that you're going to get well-researched, well-thought-out advice from somebody who does know what they're talking about when it comes to college basketball. All right, let's go ahead and continue on with the next game, which is going to be Iowa State taking on the UMKC Kangaroos. Interesting mascot there. KenPom has this game as being 85-61 in favor of the Iowa State Cyclones with a game total of 146 points. Now, if you were around last season, you remember us talking about how Iowa State likes beating the crap out of bad teams. Like, it's one thing they do to improve their metrics. Their coach, TJ Otzelberger, understands that the metrics take margin of victory into account. And so he looks to run up the score whenever possible. And so these Iowa State guys are pretty safe, high cost tag or high price tag targets because they're going to be out there on the floor, even if the game is a blowout, because they want to run the score up on people. Now, on the UMKC side, they've played 2 games so far against non-Division I competition. Their starters are Jamar Brown, Devontae Hall, Anderson Kopp, Petty, and Abankali. I need to find Petty's first name. Jason Petty and Melvin Abankali. Those are their 5 starters. For the most part, they're like really cheap. At least some of them are. Jason Brown is not cheap, or Jamar Brown, excuse me. The other one was Jason. Jamar Brown is not cheap. But looking at Bartorovic's projections and looking at their usage through the first 2 games against 91 competition, you can get a little bit from that. But with the Bartorovic projections, they did project Brown and Kopp as their 2 highest usage players so far this season. And the stats from the first 2 games kind of back that up, even though they did leave early because the games were not competitive. So both Kopp and Brown have led the team in scoring in 1 game. Devontae Hall averages 8 assists per game. So you got to feel like if UMKC is going to be keeping this one close, Devontae Hall is going to have a lot of assists. Anderson Kopp at $4,500, though, is a guy that I really do like. When you look at his stats from last season, those were as a part of UMKC before, their season his season kind of ended. So he's definitely a guy with a pedigree, definitely a guy who has a history of being a productive player $4,500 to me is too cheap for him. He's a guy that even though I expect Iowa State to win this game big, I'm probably going to be getting into my lineups at $4,500. On the Iowa State side, they've only played one game so far this season against Mississippi Valley State. In that game, Keshawn Gilbert led the team in usage. He had 17 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists in that game. That's pretty typical for him. He is a guy who can really fill up the stat sheet. He's not always the most efficient scorer, but he is a guy that can get you multiple peripheral stats, can fill up the DraftKings points in different ways. And then Tamin Lipsey is more of a true point guard. We talked about last season a lot how Lipsey and Gilbert kind of went back and forth for the usage leader, but they do it in different ways. So Lipsey, I would absolutely be willing to play as well. In that first game, he had 16 points, a board, 4 assists, and 5 combined steals and blocks, which generate you a lot of points on DraftKings. So I'm definitely cool with playing both these guys. I don't necessarily know if I would play them together, but I think if you're playing a lot of lineups, I'm going to get some Lipsey lineups. I'm going to get some Gilbert lineups. I definitely want them as pieces to my team because, like I said, I expect Iowa State to score a lot of points, and I expect these two guys to be in the game for quite a while. The other guys I'm interested in, Curtis Jones, currently averaging – in the first game, he had 5.6 boards, 3 assists. He's been really hyped up in the offseason for this team. He ended the season really strongly for them, and they're really hyping him up in the offseason. He's improved. He's going to be one of their best players. And, the stats from the first game, he didn't really score it, but he played a lot of minutes, put up some peripheral stats. I don't mind taking a chance on him at $6,200. Joshua Jefferson, the St. Mary's transfer, had 10 points, 6 boards. The guy I'm the most interested in, though, and I think he's one of the best points per dollar plays on the slate, is Deshaun Jackson. If you don't know about Deshaun Jackson, he is a transfer from the Charlotte 49ers, my alma mater, the Charlotte 49ers, of which he is a mountain of a man. And he can absolutely fill up a stat sheet, and he doesn't need to play a whole lot of minutes to do so. He is a force down on the low block. He blocks a lot of shots as well. He gets a lot of boards. He was a guy that when I saw him enter the portal, I was really disappointed to see him go from Charlotte. And then when I saw him commit to Iowa State, I'm like, you know what? I can't even be mad. He's going to a team that's going to contend for a national championship. So I really do like Deshaun Jackson. He had 9.6 boards in 19 minutes in that first game. So if he just plays 20-plus minutes, he's absolutely going to just demolish his salary at $4,200. And that's a bet that I'm willing to make. I really do like him as a play at $4,200. Next up, we've got Yale taking on Purdue, the Boilermakers versus the Bulldogs, and really this is like an academic battle because both these are great academic institutions. Ken Pom has this game as being 83-66 in favor of Purdue with a game total of 149 points. For Yale, we know they made the NCAA tournament and upset Auburn last season. Well, they actually returned 2 starters from that team, and they returned 2 key bench players from that team. One of the stars that they returned is their highest usage player, which is Bez Mbang. He had a 34% usage rate or higher in both games so far this season, which is quite impressive. Now, granted, he's had a little bit of an issue with turnovers, but the stats are really good, averaging 16 points, 5 boards, and 6 assists. Salary of $6,000. He would absolutely smash that salary. That's probably about 30 DraftKings points right there, just in the averages. So I'm definitely a guy that's going to be getting into my lineups. With this only being a 17-point spread, this game might stay close for a while. And if it does, it's largely going to be because Mbank is producing one way or another. Now, the guy that leads their team in shot attempts is John Poulikitis, and he is an absolute gunner. He pretty much almost shoots exclusively threes. He's not afraid to take it when it's contested. He's really good at it as well. He's definitely a guy that if this game is going to be close, he's going to have to make some shots. The only downside, I think I would be more likely to play Mbang, even though because Poulikitis is going to shoot more shots, Mbang is much more likely to get you a lot of peripheral stats. Poulikitis is more of just a straight scorer. But hey, every time he hits the 3, you do get a little bit of bonus on DraftKings. So I definitely see it. And I think if you're looking to build out a stack, playing those 2 guys and playing a few Purdue guys in a game stack is actually a totally viable strategy, in my opinion. Now, the rest of the guys that we got to talk about, the starting front court is Nick Townsend at $4,800 and then Samson Alaton at $3,300. They're okay. They're not super high usage players. They're not great rebounders either because, believe it or not, Yassine Garam, who's a returning bench player for this team last season, he actually leads the team in rebounding. He had a double-double in 24 minutes in their last game, which is quite impressive for a guy who's listed as a guard. So really, those 5 guys are going to be the ones that play for Yale. And then you've also got another guy, Isaac Seliskar, is a super high usage bench player for them. He would have hit 5x value for his salary in both games so far this season, but obviously this Purdue matchup is much more difficult than the first 2 games they had this season. I generally don't like playing bench players either. So really for this Yale team, I'm probably stick directly to Poulikitis and Mbang. Now on the Purdue side, They're really interesting. So they've played 2 games, and both of them have been blowouts, like not even close. Braden Smith has been their highest usage player. Look, he's great. He's just great. Like the first game against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, he had 12, 8, 15, and 2 steals. He can fill up a stat sheet, right? Like he's a triple-double threat. He's going to get you a lot of points, a lot of rebounds, and a lot of assists. And now that Zach Edey is gone, I feel like there's just more room for him to play make. There's less isolation plays for Edey. So it's just leading to more fancy points for Braden Smith. The downside is that he's really priced up at $9,400. But I got to be honest, out of all the pay-up options on this slate, I think he's pretty likely to lead the slate in total scoring. There's another guy we're going to talk about later that I really like, but I really like Braden Smith. Even though he's expensive, I still think he's a guy you can play. Now, Trey Kaufman-Renn is kind of like clicked on the wrong guy. Trey Kaufman-Renn is kind of like the new, what's the word I'm looking for here? You know how Purdue seemingly always has a really good center that always has like really high usage? Well, that guy could be Kaufman-Renn. He pretty much played the 4 for them last season because Edey is just Zach Edey. But Renn is kind of like a hybrid 4-5. And I think that his role kind of trends towards being a 5 more than being a 4. He was pretty good in their first 2 games. Just needs to play more minutes if he wants to see more fantasy point totals. Well, why not play more minutes against Yale, who's a team that might actually keep it a little bit closer, but also a team that's not good rebounding? He makes a lot of sense to me at $6,200. Fletcher Lawyer is also a guy that can get hot at any time. I have no arguments about playing him either. He's not quite the peripheral stat guy that Braden Smith is, but he is a really good offensive player. He's going to have a decent game most likely. And then we also got to talk about Daniel Jacobson, their freshman, who is supposed to be the new Zach Edey, is out. And so what you're probably going to see is Will Berg get the start. $3,500. I don't know how many minutes he's going to play. I don't know what his conditioning looks like. But he absolutely could have a huge role. He could step into the starting lineup, and at only $3,500, that's really intriguing to me. Caleb First could also step into the starting lineup, but in my opinion, it's much more likely to be Will Berg. And he's a guy that I'm certainly going to take chances on in GPP type lineups. Next game up, we have got UNCG, a school about 20 minutes from my front door, taking on SMU. KenPom projects this one to be 83-69 in favor of SMU. That's a game total of 142 points. For UNCG, they lost their 3 best players from last season. Mikhail Brown-Jones was their big. The Langley twins, Keyshawn and Kobe, were their 2 best guards. They're all gone. And so in their first game, they started Donovan Atwell, Ronald Polite, I'm going to struggle with this name, Joriam Cezano. I think I actually nailed it. And then Miles Jones and Jalen Breath were their starting 5. Basically, Atwell and Breath were the 2 best returning players that they had from last season. They were probably like their 5th and 6th best players last season, but now they're like their 1st and 2nd best players. I'm really intrigued to play both of them. Atwell led the team in usage in their first game this season, which is a good sign that he's probably going to be their lead guard this season. And then Jalen Breath actually had a double-double in that first game. So really, these are 2 guys that I think are absolutely smash plays at their salary. SMU, I don't think is going to be a great defensive team, so I absolutely think this UNCG team could get to 70, and if they do, those 2 guys are probably going to have big games. I also want to mention Ronald Polite. He is a George Mason transfer who, watching a lot of A-10 basketball because my dad is a huge Dayton Flyers fan, he had his moments at George Mason. Like, he's not this guy that is just totally like a scrub or anything. Like, no, like he was pretty good at George Mason. He had some big games for them, had some games where he just like randomly was their best offensive player and then would disappear for a few games. But $3,400 for a guy of that profile is pretty solid to me, especially considering I think Donovan Atwell is going to be pretty popular. So I think it stands to reason that if you're not going to play Atwell, take some shots at Ronald Polite. But this UNCG team, I'm definitely going to get some exposure to them for sure. Now, on the SMU side, they're interesting because they got a new coach, Andy Enfield. We know he likes to play up-tempo. We know he's not necessarily been the best defensive coach. We also know that they have been just really, really transfer-driven, just a ton of guys in the portal. And so really, like, we don't know what to expect from this SMU team. What we do know is that they have played 2 games already. So we have a little bit to go off of. Their starting lineups in those 2 games have been Miller, Traore, Johan Traore, Karioa Kendo, BJ Edwards, and Keon Ambrose Hilton started the most recent one. So basically, I really do think that Boopy, aka Kevin Boopy Miller, transfer from Wake Forest. I think that he's going to be pretty good. He currently leads the team in usage, a little over a 28% usage rate. At Wake Forest, they never really totally gave him the keys to the car, but now I think at SMU they will. He's going to be a super high usage player. They're projected to score north of 80 points in this one. I think he's a great pay up option at $8,200. I also think Johan Traore is a straight misprice at $4,500. He's currently second on the team in usage. Now, he doesn't have the highest shot rate in the world, but this is an elite rebounder, combined 34% rebound rate. He's also going to get you some blocks, get you some steals. So I definitely do like Johan Traore at $4,500. Now, one thing you might have to look out for, though, with Traore is Matt Cross did miss their last game against Florida A&M. Matt Cross is a UMass transfer who was really good. He was a double-double machine. And $4,900 would be a super reasonable price to pay for Matt Cross if he is active. It would also hurt Traore. Keon Ambrose Hilton is the guy that started in place of Matt Cross. I would be much more interested to play Traore than Ambrose Hilton because I think Traore is a more polished offensive player, which isn't saying a whole lot because I don't think Ambrose Hilton does a lot for you offensively. The other guy that is pretty interesting is Chuck Harris. He does not start. He does come off the bench, and he is like your traditional like six-man, like J.R. Smith, Jamal Crawford type gunner off the bench who can also fill up a stat sheet, honestly. You look at some of his game logs from SMU last year, like he had some huge games for them. I would be much more interested in him, though, if he was cheaper. I think he's way too expensive at $7,100, and I'm just not interested in him for that reason. Kario Okendo is a Georgia transfer who we played quite a bit last year when he was at Georgia, but with Miller and Harris pretty much combining to be the lead guard at all times. I think $6,200 is just a little much to pay for Kario Okendo. I kind of feel the same way about BJ Edwards. So for this SMU team, I'm really going to be all over Kevin, a.k.a. Boopy Miller. I might play a little Chuck Harris, just like one or two lineups, but I'm really going to be playing a ton of Johan Traore. I think he is one of the best points per dollar plays on the entire slate. He is going to be a guy that I'm going to be going after heavily. All right, let's take a quick breather, and then let's get to the last four games. Now, before we continue, I do want to mention that if you have gotten any valuable information from this video, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review the audio. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that. Like, I cannot stress enough. Like, I never knew how much that actually helped content creators until I actually became one. So if this video is helping you out, please help me out in return. Hit the like button, rate and review. And I cannot stress it enough and how much I appreciate it when you guys do that. Now, I would be remiss. There was one talking point that I missed that and kind of taking a little bit of a break, doing continued research, I found that I did not mention this guy. Ace Bailey of Rutgers is a super talented freshman in that super talented recruiting class. Has not played yet this season, but there's a chance that he plays here in this game against St. Peter's, and he's only $3,500 on DraftKings. And you got to figure a guy of his talent level, $3,500, if he plays, he could absolutely smash. He could break the entire slate. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that to you guys because there is a chance that he does end up playing in this game and does end up breaking the entire slate. You guys know, I've mentioned time and time again here in this show, bet on talent at the end of the day. And that's a guy that's super talented, and he's at a super discounted price. All right, now next up, we do have Lamar heading to College Station to take on Texas A&M. KenPom has this game as Texas A&M 85-62 for a game total of 147 points. For Lamar, this is not a great team. They're really not. Their starters are Errol White, Alexis Marmolejos, Andrew Holyfield, Darquez Dossie, and Janko Bulicic. They do have some good names, though. I'll give them that. Adam Hamilton is a guy that I want to spotlight. He was one of their best players last season, but came off the bench in their first game so far this season. That game was a blowout victory against a non-Division I opponent. So we don't really – we can't really take too much from that. Like, I still think Hamilton's probably their best player. I don't really know about anybody else. If you want to take a shot on them, you can, but Texas A&M's a pretty good defensive team. They played a pretty slow tempo. Lamar only projected to score 62 points. I think you can just pass on this team and be none the wiser. Of those starters that I did mention, you do have a few cheap ones in Marmolejos and Dossie, but I think you can bypass this team entirely. On the Texas A&M side, we continue to marvel at just how this roster was constructed. Like, how are all of these super high usage players going to play out when they're on the floor together? And the answer so far has been they haven't been on the floor together a whole lot. So the starters for Texas A&M so far this season have been Wade Taylor IV, Jace Carter, Hayden Hefner, Solomon Washington, and Pharrell Payne. Here's what makes that interesting. Wade Taylor was the guy for this Texas A&M team last season. If you need further evidence, take a look at his 5 for 26 game against Houston, where they kind of let him keep shooting because they knew that he was their guy and he's their best player, right? And so basically he is going to be their best player, their most high usage player. He's $8,700 with them implied to score 85 points. I don't think that it's a bad spot for him. What I meant when I said all the high usage players though is that they have guard Zurich Phelps, who came in from SMU, who was a super high usage player for SMU, who came in. He came off the bench in the one game that he has played so far this season. He was a super high usage guy in that game, at north of 40% usage rate. Obviously, that is not going to continue throughout the season. Holy crap, I really butchered that. It's not going to continue throughout the season, but he's a super high usage player when he's out on the floor. He's just not going to be out on the floor a whole lot. Manny Obaseki is another super high usage player that really came on strong at the end of last season for Texas A&M, but they moved him back to the bench to start the season. Why? I don't know. But really what it presents you with is when the starters are out on the floor, it's Wade Taylor's show and he is running it. And to me, that gives him a ton of upside. Now, Texas A&M is also a team that loves to rotate their forwards. So while the two starters were Solomon Washington and Pharrell Payne, Anderson Garcia is going to play a ton of minutes. He's an elite level offensive rebounder. Henry Coleman was their starting center last year. He's going to play quite a bit as well. So don't discount him either. But if I were to play any of the bigs, it would probably be Pharrell Payne. He comes in with a super high usage rate. He blocks a lot of shots as well, gets a lot of boards. Like he's just a pretty solid starting center. Like in that game to UCF, he only played 22 minutes because he was in foul trouble the whole game. But even then, he put up 15, 6, 1, 1, and 1, which is a pretty solid stat line that would have hit value for his DraftKings salary. And if he could have stayed out of foul trouble, he would have played more minutes. So I think Pharrell Payne is the guy that I'm going to look at for the forwards. Wade Taylor is the guy that I'm going to look at for the guards. And then I'm probably not going to take any chances on anybody else on this A&M side. Next up, we've got Central Michigan taking on Marquette, which Ken Pom currently has as being Marquette 86-62, game total of 148 points. On the Central Michigan side, their starters are Jacoby Heedy, Anthony Pritchard, Caden Vasco, Brian Njonga, and Hunter Harding. Kyle Vanderjagt will also play a ton of minutes off the bench. But basically, with this Central Michigan team, we kind of know who the top of their team is. Anthony Pritchard was their best player last season. He is currently their usage leader. And really last season, he averaged 29 DraftKings points a game on a salary of currently $6,700. And when you look back at the start of the season, when he played like good competition, it's a little bit of good with the bad, right? So I do think that there's a little bit of upside here for Pritchard. You know, he's going to be a guy who has the ball in his hands. And if they can keep this game close, he should play a full minute total. And even if they don't keep it close, he should play a full minute total. Like you look back at last year, like, yes, there was a dud where they got blown out by Oklahoma and he only had 17 DraftKings points, but there was also a game where they got blown out by Creighton and he ended up having 36 DraftKings points. So I do think the upside is there for Pritchard. I also think that the upside is there for Jacoby Heedy, who is their current second leader in usage. He has dual eligibility, which is super valuable on DraftKings because the forward position has been super ugly so far this season. He is a transfer in. Did not start his career at Central Michigan. I do believe he's a Bethune-Cookman transfer, if I have my information correct. And he's pretty good. He can fill up a stat sheet. He's currently their second leader in usage. So, like, really, I think you can stick to Pritchard and Heedy and kind of just be okay with that. But like I said, the other three stars are Vasco, Njonga, and Harding. If you want to try to take a chance at one of those, knock yourself out. But I'm going to stick with Pritchard and Heedy. Now, on the Marquette side, this is an interesting team. So let's talk about their starting lineup, and then let's talk about how they got there. So their starting five so far this season has been Cam Jones, Chase Ross, Stevie Mitchell, David Joplin, and Ben Gold, all of whom have started games before for Marquette. Like, this is not a transfer-heavy team at all. The difference is that some of them started last year because they were the starters. Some of them started last year like in spot starts due to guys who were injured. And, you know, really – that's kind of what we're looking at right now, for being honest, is what their lineup last year would have looked like if Tyler Kolek was injured, if Oso Iguodala was injured. This is what their lineup would have looked like, and this is how their lineup would have played. And, like, this is exactly what you would expect, right? And so here's what I mean by that. Cam Jones has been the guy for them so far through 2 games this season. He's just been great. Like, honestly, he's been great. He has a 28% shot rate so far, 38% assist rate so far. He's basically taking his scoring role from last season and Tyler Kolek's distributing role from last season and combining it into one. I think he is a guy who has the upside to lead this slate in total DraftKings points because of what he does, both scoring and assisting. I think he is a great play. I think he's a smash play. And like I said, it's basically what you would envision this team looking like last year without Kolek and Iguodaro. The games that Kolek did not play, Cam Jones would have been worthy to be at this price tag, and he would have played like this. So absolutely smash play Cam Jones $9,000. And I feel the same way about David Joplin, right? Like last year when we saw Oso Iguodaro miss, we saw some huge games from David Joplin. In fact, we saw some huge games from David Joplin when Oso Iguodaro was active because he's a guy who could just randomly have huge games. But he's their usage leader so far this season. Even more so than Cam Jones. So I definitely do think you have to consider David Joplin. I do think it's a good matchup for him down low against this Central Michigan squad. He's absolutely a guy that I'm going to be considering. And then, like I said, Ross, Mitchell, and Gold are all guys who had spot starts last year for them. They're not super high usage players. If there's any that I had interested, it would be Ben Gold. He's never played a super high minute total, but like if he does, he could really, really smash at $4,500. He is the starting center for this team with Joplin playing the 4. So he's a guy that I do have a little bit of interest in, especially in a GPP type of play. Next up, let's talk about Mercer heading to DePaul. KenPom has this one as DePaul 80-74. One of the closer games on this slate. Game total of 154 points, which means that this is a pretty good game to target. And there's no super high expensive players in this. So you can really build out a quite affordable game stack from the pieces on these two teams. So let's talk about the Mercer side. So their starters are Ahmad Robinson, Angel Montas, Cam Bryant, Tyler Johnson, and Alex Holt. Now they have played non-Division I competition so far. So we don't really have a very reliable box score to go off of. We just know that those 5 were the ones that went out there, and those 5 are the guys that we expect to play a lot of minutes. Now, according to Bart Torvik, they project Ahmad Robinson to be their team usage leader. And those Bart Torvik usage projections, every now and then they're off, but sometimes they're right. And this is a situation where if it's right, it could be super lucrative for us because Ahmad Robinson is only $3,600 on DraftKings. And like I said, this Mercer team, even though they're not great, they're projected to score 74 points in this game. And so if they've got a usage leader who's $3,600, that guy could absolutely smash and just destroy an entire slate. And the box score from game 1 kind of tracks with this. Ahmad Robinson in that first game did have 11 points, 7 boards, 5 assists. So if this is a guy who can fill up a stat sheet at $3,600, then sign me up. I think he's one of the best points per dollar plays on the slate. Now, I don't think that he is without risk. Like for sure, there's a little bit of risk involved, but just because we don't know a whole lot about this Mercer team. But $3,600 doesn't cost a whole lot to find out. And if he only gets you like 8 DraftKings points, you're really not that far behind pace anyway. Now, the other guy that I will mention is Ja Quinones. So he was the kind of the best returning player for this Mercer team. He was supposed to be one of their best players, but he came off the bench in game 1. Why? I don't know. But he kind of is one of the like should be good type of plays. And then in that game 1, Angel Montas did lead them in scoring. He is only $3,400. So definitely some pieces on this Mercer side that I think you can get to. On the DePaul side, this is a team that really DePaul was awful last season. And so what they decided to do was they decided to just fill up through the portal and get rid of all their current players, which honestly, if you're bad, isn't a bad strategy. Honestly, like I think there's worse strategies out there. So let's see if it works for DePaul. Maybe they might not be the worst team in Power 5 conference basketball this year. So Jacob Meyer is their highest usage player. He's a transfer from Coastal Carolina. He was pretty good at Coastal Carolina, but he was also a gunner. He wasn't like super efficient, but he was a guy that had the ball in his hands a ton. He can fill up a stat sheet in a variety of ways. He's pretty good. In their first win against Southern Indiana, he did have 23-3, which is pretty solid. The price tag is $7,300. He's absolutely playable. Now, what's interesting, though, is that he does not start for this team. He hasn't started either of the 2 games. He comes off the bench, but he's actually second on the team in minutes while coming off the bench. It's utterly wild. So let's talk about not one of their bench players. Let's talk about the starters. So the starters are Layden Blocker, Connor Enright, Isaiah Rivera, David Skogman, and Troy D'Amico. In that OT game against Southern Indiana, which I'm going to go by because that was the closer of their 2 games, Isaiah Rivera had 25 points. We already talked about Meyer, who had 23. And then David Skogman had a double-double in that game. Those were really the only 3 players with box scores that were worth rostering. Troy D'Amico does not play a whole lot of minutes. He's like the starter that comes in the first half and comes to the bench and doesn't go in again until halftime. Then he plays his minutes after this in the second half and comes back. Like he doesn't play a lot of minutes. Connor Enright is a Drake transfer who is just a spot shooter pretty much. And so really a lot of the usage on this team is going to lump around Meyer, Rivera, and Skogman. And I think that those 3 guys are certainly worth targeting. Now, in the second game, Leighton Blocker came alive. He led all starters in usage, and he put up 12, 6, and 7 in that game, which is a great stat line. Leighton Blocker is a transfer from Arkansas that randomly last year would have big games out of nowhere. Because I do believe he's a pretty talented player. I do think that when Eric Musselman gave him minutes, he produced last year. So he's a guy that I'm definitely going to have a little bit of interest in. It's kind of like a wild card GPP type play. But like I said, I think that between Meyer, Rivera, and Skogman and Blocker, those are 4 pieces from DePaul that you can absolutely get into your lineups. There's a few pieces from Mercer that you can absolutely get into your lineups. I think this is a really sneaky, cheap game stack that will still allow you to get to some of the better players on the slate. Next up, we have Boston University taking on UCLA. So a little Boston-LA rivalry in college basketball. You love to see it. Anyway, KenPom has UCLA as winning this game 79-58. That's a game total of 137 points, which is the second lowest on the slate, tied for the second lowest on the slate, excuse me. For Boston University, at least they're pretty predictable. That's the best thing I can say about them. They returned their 2 best players from last season, Miles Brewster and Kyron Alexander. And guess what? They've been their 2 best players so far this season. Both have been over a 24% usage rate so far this season. Here's the problem, though, is that UCLA is going to really slow this game down. They're one of the slowest tempo teams in college basketball outside of the top 350 in tempo, which is bad. And so UCLA is a pretty good defensive team too. Like, they're coached by Mick Cronin still. This is going to be a team that's going to look to slow this game down and beat you up. And that doesn't really bode well for playing guys against them in DFS. So even though we know that Brewster and Alexander are going to have a ton of usage, they've still got to put up the DraftKings points in a bad game environment in order to pay off value. So I don't think that they're necessarily the worst plays on the slate because, like, they're certain sure things, but they're far from the best plays on it either because it's just not the best matchup. Now, another guy that you can consider is Malcolm Chemezi. He is their starting center. I do think this UCLA team is a little vulnerable inside. Noah Junior Joseph of New Mexico had a really solid game against them. Now, speaking of UCLA, they're kind of a mess. They were a mess last season. They're slightly less of a mess this season, but just let me explain. So their starters are Sky Clark, Dylan Andrews, Kobe Johnson, Eric Daly, and Tyler Bilodeau. Bilodeau is an Oregon State transfer that he is like a really good play. He's another guy that has the upside to lead this slate in total DraftKings points. I really like him. I think he's the best forward option on the entire slate. So far this season, he has 33.6% usage rate, 43.6% shot rate, 40% combined rebounding rate. Like, if that sounded like a whole lot of mess, just know that that's really, really insane to have all 3 of those in the same player. Like, this is a guy who is getting the ball in his hands a lot, shooting the ball a lot, rebounding the ball a lot. He's averaging 20 and 10 so far this season. So I think he's just a great play at $8,600. Now, he's not the best defender in the world, which is why I think you can target bigs against UCLA. This guy is not going to get in foul trouble because he knows how important he is to the team. So I do think that this is a guy that you can absolutely play at $8,600. Now, where it gets to be a mess is after Tyler Bilodeau. So Kobe Johnson is a little overpriced on DraftKings, but he is what he is. This is a guy who can literally fill up a stat sheet in a myriad of ways. When he was at USC, he was never like the biggest usage guy, but he always rebounded the ball well, assisted the ball well, would get you blocks, get you steals, just do a lot of little things, right? So even though he's $8,000, I still think he's in play just because of his ability to fill up a stat sheet. I would prefer to see him in the 7K range, though. That's where he was at when he was at USC. Now, here's where it gets to be a mess. Sky Clark and Dylan Andrews, both of whom are point guards, both of whom are in the starting lineup, both of whom want to be the point guard. And they kind of are like splitting duties. Andrews was great at the end of last season for UCLA, especially like down the stretch in March as their starting point guard. But Mick Cronin's like never really liked him. That's just the general vibe that I've gotten. And so he is like not being given the reins to be the starting point guard this year. They went and got Sky Clark in the portal from Louisville. And Sky Clark is a guy who can give you some big time performances, but he's really enigmatic, really erratic. So you never really know what you're going to get from him. You know, he kind of had a rap as being kind of a selfish guy when he was at Illinois. We'll see how that pans out at UCLA, but, you know, between the two of them, with them both kind of splitting the point guard duties, I'd rather play the cheaper guy. And so Sky Clark at $5,400 is a guy that I would probably rather play in DFS just because he is $1,700 cheaper. And then after those two, like Eric Daly is a big that starts but isn't all that great. William Kyle's a transfer from South Dakota State who was great there, hasn't really taken off here. Sebastian Mack was a super promising freshman for UCLA last year that just hasn't cracked the starting lineup yet. So, like, really, after Bilodeau and then Johnson, they're really just a train wreck. And I really don't know if I'm going to be targeting anybody on the team outside of those guys. All right, but that's going to do it for this episode, y'all. So, really, I hope I gave you guys all the information that you need in order to build a winning lineup here on this Monday night slate. I will be back for the Tuesday night slate because that's a really good one. It's the Champions Classic, a lot of really good games across the college basketball world. So I will be back for that. But hopefully I gave you guys all that you need to know this episode to build some winning lineups for Monday. And hopefully you'll come back with more money in your pocket to play on Tuesday. So if this video did help you out anyway, please hit the like button. Please rate and review for listening on audio. Make sure you're subscribed so that way you can know when the Tuesday episode drops. But other than that, best of luck to you guys on the Monday night slate, and I will see you guys next time.